What do most Christians get wrong about Martin Luther King?
Ooh, man, this is a.
Is that too much? Is that too
It,
big
I
of a
mean, it's
question?
just that it's so much. I'm gonna go with the most controversial thing. What we
Oh,
get
here we
wrong.
go. This is what I'll clip. I'll clip this out and promote it with that.
This is why I don't get invited to the cookout anymore. I think the biggest thing that we get wrong is that we believe he was a Christian, and I don't think the evidence aligns with that.
Yeah.
And this is why I say, when you look at what he believed, he denied the Trinity, he denied the virgin birth, he denied the resurrection, pretty much the supernatural miracles of Scripture. Those are the things that he denied. He didn't believe those things were true. He found inspiration in the Bible. He found inspiration from Jesus as a good teacher and a good moral man, the same way he did from Gandhi, you know. But in terms of believing the gospel and death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and our sins being atoned for, and that Dr. King didn't believe that, and he didn't. I know people who have gone through his sermons, everything he's written, and they say they can't find one instance of him preaching the gospel. It was always some type of social gospel. It was always some type of activist type message to whatever it was he was preaching. But it never came down to Christ. It never came down to our sins being atoned for. Those types of things, he never preached those things. And so we get that wrong. And then, so that's his doctrine. And then you look at his life and what came out, not only in the FBI files, but in his best friend who wrote a book in the 80s and detailed a lot of the stuff that the FBI files backed up in terms of King's womanizing and wild, escapades, we'll call them. Yeah, he was just out there living his life, doing his thing. So when you look at his doctrine, you look at the way he lived his life, you would say, I might agree with him on something, but he wasn't a Christian. He's not the model for Christians to follow. He had this idea of the brotherly love, and he wanted everybody to get along. But what we know from the progressive left today, you don't have to be a Christian to believe those things, right? You don't have to be a Christian to believe that you want to help the poor or everyone should be equal. And you don't have to be a Christian to believe those things. And so while Dr. King got inspiration from the Bible, I don't believe he believed it in terms of a salvific message. And so I think that's the biggest thing. The other thing is he called himself a democratic socialist.
Isn't that what Bernie Sanders calls himself?
Yes, and AOC, and because he was very critical of capitalism. He believed capitalism need to go away and need to be replaced with what he called democratic socialism, which was wealth redistribution and all this type of stuff. He claims he wasn't a communist, but everybody he surrounded himself with was a communist. That's the hard part to believe. Like, you're not, but this guy is. Your speechwriter, the person who wrote the "I Have a Dream" speech, is a Marxist. Like, and so that is what Christians don't understand the psyop that was ran on us in terms of the way Dr. King even became the face of the movement. I'm going to give a plug to my buddy Chad Jackson. He has a documentary on Dr. King coming out here pretty soon. If you follow Chad O. Jackson on YouTube or Instagram, he's posted clips, and he just did an interview with Jason Whitlock this week where they talk about it. The way Dr. King became the face of the movement, it wasn't organic. He was pushed to the forefront. There was a man by the name of Joseph H. Jackson. He was the president of the National Baptist Convention. He was the longest running president. He was president for 29 years. He was born in the year 1900, and I think he died in 1990. And so he lived through a lot. But he was not a fan of Dr. King. And Dr. King and his group of activists and progressives tried to take over the National Baptist Convention. So you would think, Dr. King, everybody's behind Dr. King. Like, no, Dr. King did not have the support to take over at the National Baptist Convention. Joseph H. Jackson got reelected as president. A fight broke out. One of the guys fell off the stage, hit his head, died. Because of that, Dr. King and his followers basically got kicked out of the National Baptist Convention. And then Dr. King started his own. He started the Progressive National Baptist Convention, which is still around today. If you know Raphael Warnock, he's part of that. If you go to their website today, the Progressive National Baptist Convention, It is nothing but social gospel. It might as well be a BLM website. But that's Dr. King's legacy. That's who Dr. King was. Because people say, if Dr. King was around today, who would he be? He wouldn't be any different than the people we have issues with today. The Jesse Jacksons, the Al Sharptons. Look, everyone who came from his tree. That's what he was. That's who he was. But he became more popular after his death than he was when he was alive. And that's one thing that we don't realize is that Dr. King's popularity wasn't that great. And it wasn't just racist white people that didn't like him. It was a lot of the black people and the elder black, leadership. And people don't realize how young Dr. King was. I think he was 34 when he got killed. And so in 1968, he was 34. So in 1960, he was a young man. And so someone that young trying to take the mantle and usurp all the elders in the community and follow me, people weren't really following him like that. That's why the civil rights movement was a youth movement. They used a lot of students to do a lot of the marching and the rallying. The black people of that day really weren't the big Martin Luther King supporters that we're told, that became later on as the narrative began to change. He was a very divisive figure even within the black community. And so Joseph H. Jackson was a man who opposed him, who had more of the old school Booker T. Washington mindset. For instance, the Montgomery bus boycott. He offered to buy buses and send them down to Montgomery, and Dr. King rejected it because Dr. King's motive wasn't to do our own thing or it wasn't about, oh, we're downtrodden. And no, it was to push a social agenda. And so he was using the boycott to do that. It wasn't that black people couldn't have buses. We had our means to having buses and all types of things. But he was pushing this agenda, it's a social agenda, and he was using an antagonistic approach to get it. And that's what bothered a lot of people, so not defending the Klan is horrible. But Dr. King was intentionally trying to instigate those types of reactions. That was his whole play. These people are racist, they're bigots. We're going to go down here, we're not going to pull a permit, we're going to march. And when they put the hose and dogs on us, the cameras are going to see it. And we're going to cry victim, because this is what people don't know either. Like those videos, those images we saw, that was standard practice for the way the police would break up riots. So let's say you had white unions that would not pull a permit and go in there and try to march. The police would do the same thing to them. The dogs and the hoses break up the crowd. But it's spun throughout history like, oh, this was something that was just done to black people. It's like, no, Dr. King knew that was the tactic. So he would go down there, do those things to get the reaction and have the cameras pointed on it and then cry victim. All that stuff was orchestrated. The Rosa Parks situation, orchestrated. That didn't just happen. She was handpicked to sit on the bus that day and to refuse to move so they can create this whole incident. It was all staged for us, to create this movement. It was an activist movement. That's what it was. And they learned these tactics from this school called the Highlander School in Tennessee. And I know I'm going a lot and I'm rambling. But it's just, I want people to understand that what we think we know about the civil rights movement isn't what it really was. And so a lot of it was so organized and staged. We thought this was some organic movement. We thought everybody was behind this except for the racists. And no, it just really wasn't. And so once you start to understand that what happened in the civil rights movement wasn't too different from what we saw in 2012 and 2014. 2020, yes. It really wasn't that different. And it just so happens that the founders of BLM admitted they thought they were in good company, but it was a Zoom call, and admitted that they were trained Marxist, right? And so these tactics aren't new. It's kind of the point I'm getting at. Whether we say the movements were the same or not, they used the same tactics because they were taught by the same people to do the same things. To bring this is how you bring about a social movement. This is how you bring about change. This is how you guilt people. That's why a lot of times when riots happen, you're like, why isn't the police going there and breaking it up? Because the police learned that's what they want you to do because it looks bad. And so the police now stand there. They might, do some things now to break it up if it gets too bad, some tear gas or something. But they're not going there and beating people and dragging people because that's just bad optics. And that's what the activists want you to do because it worked in the 60s.
Oh, you called it a psyop? I think it's a great word for it. It's propaganda. It's a PR campaign.
It is.
To convince people of a particular version of events that most favors their agenda. Like, what are some other tells that we could look for, or other tactics that are being used as a part of this psyop in our day?
I would say look for like the collectivist mindset, look for the oppressor oppressed narrative. I will say this too, when you're reading something, when you're reading an article that is pushing some of this stuff, they use the same tactic. So I'm an analyst by trade. And so when I read something, I'm like, wait a minute, they didn't even prove their whole thesis they were writing in this article. And so what they'll do is, this is the same thing they do every single time. They start off talking about some historical wrong. It's true. Then they get down further into the article, then the paragraph jumps to modern day, and they start talking about these issues today. They didn't prove the connection. They didn't prove there was anything there, but they set you up with the historical narrative and then say, now here are these problems we have today. You didn't prove a connection between these two events. The person reading the article, the average person reading the article won't pick up on that. And they'll just think like, oh yeah, black people are poor today because of redlining in the 80s, right? And it's like they did not prove a connection between those two things.
But you're emotionally primed by the heartbreaker story at the beginning.
Yes, and the guilt of the past, because people have
Yes.
real guilt about the past. So this guilt, emotional driven thing about the past, and then they start talking about the problems today, and you're sucked in. But from an analyst perspective, I'm like, you did not show that those things are the reason that this exists. That's what I would say be on the hook out for. It's the collectivist mindset, the oppressor-oppressed narrative, the emotional setup to talk about issues today without really giving any real thought to what might be the cause of issues today. Or the anti-racist thing where disparities, and this is another thing, this is another tale. Whenever they talk about disparities, it's always a black-white paradigm. It is always a black-white paradigm. But it's the problem. There are way more people in America than just blacks and whites. And so when you compare all the people together, Asians, Indians, Hispanics, you put everybody in the pot together. Now let's look at the data. You don't see a pattern where whites are doing better than everybody else. You don't see the systemic racist narrative. It only works because they're trying to use a black-white paradigm, and they're just comparing black people to white people. And then they're saying, see, the system, it's like, no, there's more data in there that you're not showing me. And in many cases where whites are doing better than blacks, there are other groups doing better than whites. And so it's no consistent thing to prove systemic racism when you look at all the data and all the groups together to say that the system is therefore keeping people down, of people of color down.
Even in those presentations, white and black doesn't always mean color of the skin, because showing up on time, working hard, being a family man, being successful, that's whiteness.
Yes.
And being oppressed and victim. So you're in this conversation, it's two white men talking. And
yes.
So it's like the data is manipulated and presented in such a way that it makes you think that anytime you see dark skin, you see a black man, that all of the things that have been curried and manipulated and curated applies to that man. He's an oppressed victim, and you, white person, you're the oppressor. It's your fault. And basically, you got to give him your money. It's like that's what it all amounts to. It's like, take the success of one group of people and transfer all their money to another group of people because they deserve it, and that's your punishment for your systemic racism and slavery and all the sense of the past.
Yes. And any disparity between blacks and whites, the cause is automatically discrimination and racism.
Always.
Yeah, because from Ibram X. Kendi's faulty logic, he says either it's discrimination and racism, or you're saying there's something wrong with black people. Those are the only two options he gives you, and he guilt people in that. But the one thing he just never talks about is, well, what about culture? Culture isn't black or white. When I say culture, I'm not talking about music and food. I'm talking about your values, your beliefs, and your practices. When you talk about culture, you talk about what a group values, what they practice, what they believe. Those things are going to determine different outcomes for different groups because it's based on culture. And that's something that is never allowed to be talked about. because it's always viewed from a genetic standpoint. And it's like, this isn't genetics, this is culture.
Hey, if you enjoyed this content, come check out the Center for Biblical Unity. Download our free ebook, Is Christianity a White Man's Religion? Click on the link in the description below.